A long, long time ago in a galaxy far away, I used to live in a very small town. And I had moved to this very small town from one of the biggest cities in the United States. And so I went from, you know, suburban neighborhoods to living out in the country on a 40-acre spread of land. And unfortunately for me, during part of that time I was in high school, and so for like 2 years, I was, well, actually for like 1 year I was completely alone. Okay, but for a lot of that time, my one of my parents was not there with me. All right, so basically my senior year, I was out on this land, and I had a lot of spare time. And there was very little electricity because I had to save money on electricity. So I'd like burn wood for fire. I go out and get the mesquite, burn wood. And I was eating Mormon relief food because my dad was a ex-member of the Mormon church, and we went to the food bank and all that. And so life was pretty shitty. But I had a lot of spare time, and I loved being on that land. So I would go out almost every day, school days, obviously I didn't do this, but a lot of times I go out and sit on the back fence area of the property and stare at the mountains in the distance and think, why do people do the things that they do? Why do extremely rich people, why are they sad? Because on the surface, when you're a kid, you think, well, if I get these resources, I will be happy. Because now I don't have the resources and I'm sad. My life sucks, right? But it was during that time that I formulated something similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I read his book, I think later, like years and years later. But, it basically came to me, well, we need to satisfy these basic needs, because if we don't have those satisfied, we're going to be upset all the time or hungry. Or my biggest pet peeve ever growing up that made me feel poor was running out of hot water when you're in an apartment. Oh man, that's the worst. When you're taking a bath and you can't get more hot water into the bath, because I used to love taking baths. So that was one of the gateway drugs of philosophy for me, is why, when people have the resources, are they still unhappy? Okay. Well, we can, Maslow wrote a book that I read, and I'm probably going to not sum it up correctly, but it was called The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. And I read this book before, I think it was before the one where he has his hierarchy of needs pyramid. But the title grabbed me, right? Because I've always been curious about human nature. And in it, he's saying, how far can we go? How great can we be? How much can we overcome, our personal foibles and stuff? And that question, what is the farther reaches of human nature, is the question for our species. Because like I said in the AI video, without some kind of intervention from an outside entity like an AI or Space Friends or something, we're left to our own devices. And unless we create social structures, and I'm not talking about government, I'm talking about scalable social structures that promote non-denominational positive qualities that are scalable to community size, we will never have a unified goal as a species. In other words, our main goals are divided. Okay, we have family lines, and those family lines have their own goals. Okay, it's not just survival, it's thriving, right? We want to be successful, generation after generation after generation. So that's one line of goals. And then there are the layers of other goals of the municipalities you're in, the state you're in, the country you're in, and ultimately the planet that we're on, right? Well, and I'm not against corporations, okay? But when you add a corporation into the mix, it is an entity. It's considered an entity. And the problem with humans is, one of the problems, is that we can take on mob mentalities or groupthink that are centered around the goals of one person or one corporation or one state entity. And they can drive the majority of our decision making, okay? So if we're asking the question, how far can we go? How good can we be? Good being, whatever parameter you want to use. I'm not saying that negative things and, quote unquote, bad behavior or deviations cannot be positive on an individual scale. I'm saying we're taking it as a whole and we're saying, how far can we go? Are we going to get to the Jetsons world where we have flying cars finally and, no one wants for anything. So we're talking about basically some form of universal income, my dream of everyone has a storage facility, everyone has mental health care and physical health care, and no one is starving. Okay, the Star Trek version of the United States or the world in the future where we're like, okay, phew, in the book, it took the bots and the dirts to help the Reggies get to that point. In a sense, that's what's happening now. The majority of the people are not innovating things. They're consuming things and giving feedback on the things they consume. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? There's so many restraints and constraints on a householder. And then we're getting back into the balance. We're getting back into the fears. We're getting back into willpower and free will. Okay, it's all together in the snapshot of balance that you can look at. But basically, there are so many factors and stumbling blocks and ballast and things like that in place that it's very hard to overcome those things to ask the question, how far can we go? We are mired in the daily grind. It's not our fault, okay? It's just the nature of how we have allowed random social evolution to happen, okay? If you look at any part in history that was really, really bad, and we take a time machine back there, and, I was telling this to someone else the other day, you show up, we're, way in the future, and we're like, we want to go visit the Aztecs or the Mayans or, whoever. We jump in the time machine, we go back there, but our translators are not working. They're on the fritz, right? And we land, and the door opens up, and there's this, we step out, and there's, the pyramids, and there's this huge crowd, and they're cheering, and then the dude up on the pyramid is stabbing someone in the chest and pulling his heart out and holding it up and drinking, whatever they did. I've watched historical videos. I'm just kind of being off the cuff, okay? We would be like, holy fuck, we need to get out of here and go back in the time machine, right? Because the guy would be speaking in a language we couldn't understand. Once the translator kicked in, he would tell us he's like, hey, you got, we're wearing the same outfits, let's say. Hey, you guys, you're late for the sacrifice to the sun god. There's snacks over there, and we're selling little miniature stick versions of the guy being the sacrifice. He's really jazzed about being sacrificed, Because apparently when they went to free some of the people that were going to be sacrificed, they're like, hey, put me back in the pen. This is an honor. What are you doing? I'm trying to get to the afterlife. So what I'm trying to say is the language that we use is the only way to extend your willpower and free will. Back in the medieval days and, farther back, if you had a sword, you could only physically kill as many people as you could within the range of that sword. Once we created firearms and range weapons, now you can multiply your native abilities to kill people far, far away and in vast quantities, right? So then a person's verbal influence was increased, because now it's not like one guy in the center surrounded by 10 dudes and he could potentially kill them all with a sword. And he's like, you better follow what I say because I'm a badass and you suck at sword play and I can kill you, right? Now that person is saying, I have a firearm, let's say it's a machine gun. He's like, I can kill you all in like less than a second and I'll go after your families. So you better do what I say. And they're like, okay, we're on board. Then they become an extension of that person's native free will artificially. He would not be able to control them otherwise. And then that framework, that pattern, that, however you want to say it, is how everything works in our society today. The government works, the military works, corporations, they all work on the word, on the spoken word. They can't physically, the military could physically stop you from leaving, right? But if you work at a corporation and the guy's like, file this paper and, do this spreadsheet, and you're like, fuck that, I'm going home. He can't stop you. He can't physically, is it possible? Is it permissible? Is it bearable? It's possible for you to leave. It's permissible because under the law, they can't constrain you. And it's bearable if you want to do it. In other situations with the military and other things, the possible part is there. But as soon as you hit the permissible, you will not be allowed to do the things you want, to exercise your free will through your willpower, okay? So, to jump back on track, different goals, okay? So each one of those things, the family tree, the governments, the corporations, the military, we all have different goals, and then you have your personal goals. And until we have some, sort of unified vision, they will run in parallel tracks. There may be overlap, but they're not going to be aligned completely. And one of the problems that arise with this, if you're not using your free will and willpower properly, if you're not using your windows of perception to analyze your behavior, if you're not looking at your balance, is that you will look outside of yourself for the failures of not doing those things. This is where we get into large-scale societal problems, okay? Instead of looking at your own lack of free will or discipline or training, you will say, I am failing, and using a very generic term, I can't get a job. I am failing. Why can't I be promoted? Those blanket terms that are not looked at with finer detail and discernment. Okay, so discernment is huge in this whole process. The ability to discern differences in things, color gradients, stock fluctuations, discernment. Okay, good people, bad people. So if you just look at the problem as a blanket thing, like I can't get a job. Well, if you don't look at your life through the lenses of balance, free will, willpower, perceptual windows, you're going to look somewhere else for the cause. I'm not saying there are never external causes that you could find in the data or in reality in your, in your environment for things, okay? What I'm saying is that above and beyond those actual causes, there is your part of the equation that you need to take care of and look at. So if you can't get a job, it may not necessarily be because of an influx of a certain type of person or group or, dilution of the, or saturation of the job market because of other groups. It may be because you have not updated your job skills, or you need to move to a different neighborhood that has more jobs, or you need to go to college to get, you know what I'm saying? There's the personal part of it that you have not looked at if the other part, the external part, is not the main driver of the effect. Okay, so if you can't get a job, you need to look at every part of all the moving parts. If you just knee-jerk a solution to a very vague, generic question, why can't I get a job? Then you get the problems with scapegoating. Then you also, it's easier for us to create class systems, okay, or caste systems, like in India. They have the untouchables, you know. There is no inherent reason for these systems. There may be a socioeconomic reality to them, like I make more money than him, right, or her, and on up the scale to billionaires, okay? But there is no reason to denigrate or disregard or, you know, shit rolls downhill or scapegoat someone that makes less than you and base their worth off of how much money they make. There is no logic behind that because you do not know the working gears of their balance, okay? You don't know if they have the same linguistic skills you have. You don't know if they have been massively abused in their past. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying you do not have that data. So to make a sweeping generalization about a class of people that you know very little about in reality is more of that diversive, goal-driven system, okay? So it's easier to scapegoat people if you don't look at those, your own, balance reality. It's easier to create class systems because you're dealing with bulk, generic, chunky terms like, whatever it is, immigrants. If you just use that one word as a placeholder for millions and millions of people, you're doing yourself a disservice and you're doing the world a disservice because you are not looking with fine detail into the personhood of these groups. And you're also not looking at your personal part in creating that stratification, okay? I know it's easier to not do these things. We're not talking about easy. We're answering the question, what is the farther reaches of human nature? Now, you may say, who gives a shit? My family line is going to be fine. I'm going to take care of them. They're going to go into the future and be successful, okay? Or my country is going to be fine. Who gives a shit about these other countries outside of us that have lower economic value? The problem is we are in a closed system on the world, on the Earth's surface, okay? If someone creates polluted air in another country, or we create it, it does not contain within the boundaries of our country. It travels. Okay, I just saw this thing on the news about this huge algae bloom that is twice as long as the United States, that is floating towards Florida. It's hit these other places. They have to use, like, this one place had to use something like 1,200 dump trucks a day just to clear it from the beaches to be able to throw it in a landfill. It's filled with arsenic, I believe, and it is going to kill off, it will create dead zones, okay? So it floats over, let's say, the swampland or the wetlands in Florida and it absorbs the oxygen and kills all these fish and manatees and stuff. We are in a closed system right now. So anything we do, especially in the United States, I'm not saying, the United States is the greatest country on earth. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying a lot of places mimic and imitate what we do. Whatever we do here, you can see ripple across other countries, okay? You can see the same pattern or blueprint of behavior travel the globe as they're imitating. It's almost like we are the benchmark for what is possible. So if something happens here, other places say, oh, we can do it too. Whatever it is, good or bad. They're like, if they can do it, we can do it, right? So in a very real sense, the United States is kind of like one of the capstones or club bouncers for the human potential. So if we're infighting here and we can't figure our shit out here in the United States, a lot of these other countries are going to have problems when they emulate all our issues. Okay? So if we do not look at our own balance on an individual level, our own free will and willpower, and fit that into a larger unified goal for humanity, not just the U.S., the entire world, to move towards something like the Star Trek world, right? Where we don't want for anything that should obviously be taken care of, like food, shelter, clothing, things like that, income, okay? Then the ultimate answer to the question, what is the farther reaches of human nature, is not very far. If we cannot overcome our own worst impulses by analyzing our own personal behavior and extrapolating that onto larger societies and structures and corporations, etc. The last aspect of this that I want to talk about before I finish this, module is one of the things that I think is the biggest problem right now for our time period and societies that we live in, okay? So I really do not like politics. I don't like talking about politics or thinking about politics, but it has come so much to the forefront over the last, 5 or 6 years that you have to talk about its connection to balance. Okay. So to my mind, there's 3 categories that we can look at using balance. There's balance itself. All balance is the record, the ledger, like we talked about, of everything happening in the universe and locally and in the person or organism or matter. If you're talking about ultimate reality, some people say, what's the ultimate reality? Well, beyond our perceptual caps, and the things we can perceive with tools and meters and, there is the bedrock of what is happening, which is, I consider balance. Okay. And balance encompasses the actual happening and our misunderstanding of the happening, everything that is physically going on. So in a sense, that is what I consider true reality and fact. So a fact for me is something that actually took place and is recorded in balance and travels back, through time into the past. Okay, so we're dealing with linear time, timeline, okay, and is locked into the record of balance. It is unchangeable and factual. It happened. Okay, if we had the diagnostic abilities, we could go back and look at it and pinpoint it and say, that's when it happened, okay? So you drop a ball, it bounces on the ground, it comes back up and you catch it. If we had a time machine or there was a device recording everything that happened all the time on Earth, we could run the tape back and look and say, yes, it factually happened. And it was incorruptible, like we couldn't mess with the data or anything, okay? That's fact. That realm of fact also encompasses our behavior as humans. So we may interpret the facts and extrapolate our truth from it, but we cannot deny that the thing happened. So if someone says something, no matter what it is, they physically moved their mouth, the words were recorded in balance, or, we would perceive it on devices or in person. That part took place. Our interpretation of what the person said is up in the air, okay? It could be something as innocuous as, I love cats. One person's going to say, oh, she loves cats. Okay. Another person is going to say, they're being sarcastic. They hate cats. Another person is going to say, they weren't even talking about cats. Cats is a placeholder. It doesn't matter. The interpretation. We're talking about the facts of the balance. It's locked in. Okay. And we're also not extrapolating from that their motivations or where their head was at or any of those things. We're just talking about fact. A fact is something that is locked into the balance and can be analyzed by rolling the tape back, if you had the means or whatever means we do have to do that. So when I was in college, I took two religious studies courses. One, I think, was just a general overview, and one was Native American religions, I believe. In that class, I had a very eccentric teacher, by my standards. And on the first day abouts, she said, everyone has different truths, and we need to treat all these truths equally as being real, right? And that kind of struck me as odd, but if you think about it, we have to give that allowance to any religious belief because none of them can be quote unquote proven, okay? So, yes, in this sense, a Christian person's view of the reality of the life of Christ and the Bible and all that is really on the same footing as the Genesis story of a First Nations, belief system. Okay. So they're pretty much the same. They hold the same weight. Okay, if you're analyzing them. Now, I'm not saying they make equal sense. Okay, because one of them could have physical artifacts or written records that back up part of the story, let's say. Okay. But we have to say they're both truths held by these people, and they are using those truths to tell them how to live their life in a certain way. Okay. I think the issue comes from when we basically treat these truths as the facts, the same facts that would be in the balance, the record of balance. And I think this is where we get into a lot of problems socially and politically within the last, 5 or 6 years. People being, thinking the other group of whoever is, crazy or off the rails or unreasonable, is because we don't all have access to the same facts, in the balance record in the first place. And also, we are not looking at the facts in fine enough detail to find out where the bedrock is, to find out where the facts stop, the recording ends, okay? So let's say that you heard from a friend that a politician said XYZ. And this person is like, yeah, man, he said XYZ and that's terrible. Well, unless you look at the tape in context, or let's say this person is quoting a study and they're like, there is no poverty, dude, because 59% of whatever, right? Unless you look at the data and other studies and the metadata surrounding it, you are not getting to the facts that are in the balance record, the actual happenings. you are getting, again, the surface, generic, chunky, blanket concepts. And I think it is too hard to, if you're not chasing down the facts, to use those as truths. And when you do that, then you have all this division. Now, you could get down to the facts, the bedrock, and still disagree on the interpretation of the facts, okay? So for instance, let's say you were an archaeologist and you are on a dig and you know, Göbekli Tepe, I'm pronouncing that wrong, but that site, okay, some people said, well, they built it to worship the gods, right? And then someone else said, well, look at the placement of, you know, this glyph and this animal, and they're obviously using it to chart the stars, okay? So the facts are the artifacts, the things that you have that traveled through linear time and are in the balance record, and that now you have the data of, okay? Because I think all we really have is the data. Even, I mean, I'll go into that later, but so you now have the physical artifact in front of you, the data. That is the fact that is in balance, the record. And then you have two archaeologists fighting over what it really means, because they don't have access to the actual balance of the actual event farther back in the timeline. They don't have the time machine to jump back and talk to the people building the temple, or see how they're building it, or see if they even look up at the stars. Because they do not have access to the temporal balance sheet of that period, then you get into interpretation differences, okay? That's when each individual is creating or believes their own truth about the only facts that they have, which is the artifacts. So, to avoid this in general, I know everyone is busy, okay? We don't have the time to chase down every study we hear about, or, you know, people are arguing with us and we're like, yeah, that doesn't sound accurate. We don't have the time to chase all this shit down. You could do it, but what I'm going to throw out there is, in many cases, it would not matter, because you chase it all the way down to the bedrock, and then that actual issue may not even be the thing that the person is railing against. Okay, so let's say we're talking about climate change, and the person's like, well, you know, it doesn't matter, recycling doesn't matter because they throw it all away. And so you individually are like, well, I don't know if that's accurate. So you chase it all the way down the rabbit hole, and you physically go to the recycling places, and you look at all the chain of, you know, custody and stuff, and you find out that, well, it's working at 25% capacity. And you go back to your friend and you say, you're mistaken. Here are the facts. You know, in the balance sheet, you don't say balance sheet, but here are the facts. And then they say, well, okay, but what about windmills? You know, they didn't even care about getting to the bedrock of the facts in the balance sheet, because they are focused on larger ecosystems of that same theme. And they will keep circulating through the various themes of that thing to keep themselves locked into that mindset. So looking at the bedrock facts, in quote, is not going to change their mind. They're not looking that deep into it. They're not looking that deep into themselves. And so it's not a good use of your time to try to, like, convince these people, in my opinion, convince them to believe a completely different system. You can do it if you want to, but it is a huge time sink. But I will say that we need to teach kids how to do these things, just like we need to teach them about finances and relationships and all these things. They need to know how to get to the bedrock of subjects so that they can see the facts and they can come to their own truths and conclusions based on the best data possible that's unclouded by opinion. We want to be able to give them that data. So we need to come up with better systems to deliver data to people that is unbiased, bedrock, in various stages of explanation. So you may have seen these YouTube videos, XYZ subject explained on 3 levels, 6-year-old, college age student, and professional level. That's the type of thing we need. We need people of varying degrees of intelligence and consciousness, the consciousness windows, okay, to be able to access the data at whatever level they will be able to comprehend, so that we can work off of the actual facts instead of what we perceive as our truths. We're going to extrapolate truths from the facts. It's just going to happen, okay? And yes, humans use generalizations to go about their day. What I'm saying is, if you ask the question, what is the farther reaches of human nature? If you say you're not willing to use, like I said earlier, the tools that I've been talking about, analyzing balance, widening your perception, looking at your own shit and your own goings on, then it will be much harder for us as a species to operate from the fact level through and apply it to our personal foibles and issues, okay? And then carry that forward into a unified vision of humankind. I'm old, so I almost said mankind. Humankind. You know what I'm saying? We need a different pattern of assimilating or dispensing facts and wisdom and things like that. It's almost like our best knowledge is written on papyrus that can be burnt and destroyed, okay? We need to lock in more of the positive changes and advances on a global level to be able to have that unified vision. I went to philosophy class, right? I was super excited. I went to a group that met after the class, and we started talking about these issues, and I'm like, okay, what about XYZ issue? And what I found was that people were not there to solve the issues. They were there to rediscover the problems and to discuss them, but it was like a hamster wheel, okay, that I was jumping onto, and I run on the hamster wheel, and then I move on to something else. There was no product generated from that specific group, and there were some really smart people in that group, but there was no deliverable. And so we're wasting all these human resources by not being able to move the deliverables through the strata of society in a unified way towards a unified goal, okay? Now, I'm a science fiction writer, so to my mind, whatever the Fermi paradox answer is, part of it is probably going to contain the fact that if we don't solve some of our human issues now, no one else is going to want to play with us. We're not going to be welcome out into some galactic sphere or, the Federation, because we're going to be space assholes. We're going to take our wasteful resource use, our, low level of discipline, our prejudices, our lack of insight, and we're going to just go out into space with all that stuff. And I don't think that we would be greeted happily by any other advanced society that has conquered a lot of that stuff. I mean, I could be completely wrong, and they could be like, hey, we could be like the stupid friend that jumps off the roof into the pool, I don't know. But what I'm saying is, if there are caps that are baked into the Fermi paradox, if there are gatekeepers and gates to get through, we will have to solve some of those riddles here on Earth before we can leave en masse to other solar systems and places like that. The bots were able to do that because they were transhuman. They were uplifted. They were operating on a completely different scale, just like the Dirts, where, let's just assume that Coraline had double the IQ of a normal human, okay? And then she had access to core and cis. I mean, if you're at that level and you're willing to look inside at the parts of you that are unproductive or destructive, the chance of failure is very low. But we don't have that advantage. I mean, we can augment ourselves now with exterior, peripherals or substances, but even that has caps. So we have to develop social systems and systems of being that are scalable, that will allow us to work on these issues, not create caste systems, not create, prejudiced tiers in society, not to cast people away as if they were worthless or a worn-out product, And the only way to do that I can see now, is to start on the personal level, look at your balance, your free will usage, maximize the things you can to increase your free will, and project that free will beyond the native caps that you have on your abilities, and spread whatever goodness and productivity and hope that you have out from yourself using these tools. We have the internet, we have all these other tools. So keep re-examining yourself, keep evaluating your own balance and what's holding you back and what you need to work on. Come up with the plans to execute to get to your goals, and then try to spread that general technique around. I mean, if you want to. I mean, I could be full of shit. I don't know. Try to help other people with it if they want the help, because without looking inside like that, the exterior world is like a reflection of that lack of insight. And we're just going to keep repeating the same shit no matter how much technology we get. Or, there's like a political shift, and then all our minds shift again, like a wave, like a tsunami, okay? We can't live that way. We cannot be so fragile as to be swung by truths manufactured by other people, irregardless of the facts in the balance sheet. We have to build a hardiness, a grit to our personhood that can withstand that stuff. So in mass, we are not manipulated by one psychopath or one sociopath or one narcissist that doesn't care about wasting lives and resources and centuries, and you know what I'm saying? They don't care about those things. That is not what they're focused on. If you claim that you are focused on the future, whether it's the world or just your family line or whatever, you have to analyze yourself, take into account the fact that we're in a closed system on a little Carl Sagan said, a little blue dot out in space, and then act accordingly and try to help the world find that unified vision where we can arrive. I call it the party on the beach, right? We show up, everyone's in a good mood, we're not trying to hurt other people, we're not trying to cause problems. We're just there, and we finally get to, like in the book, smell the roses and enjoy life, because the tech and culture has moved us to a place where that is possible. Okay, so I hope this gives you a better snapshot of, one potential theory of what free will could be and how you can maximize it in very practical ways, and how, you see some of the pitfalls of not looking at your own balance sheet that you could fall into that could cause societal problems, personal problems, global problems. And I hope someone or someone's way smarter than me can use any of this, because it, like I said, it could be total bullshit. I know it works for me personally, to keep me on track and to make me feel at least like I'm doing some good in the world and I'm, helping someone, if not only myself, reach my goals. If I hadn't looked at some of my habits and balance issues, I never would have finished writing my book, because I have at least 20 or more books unfinished. Right? So I had to overcome all the things that said I couldn't do it and I'm a, worthless piece of shit, all those things, and just get through it. I had to develop patterns and behaviors and discipline and free will to just say, to answer the 3 questions and just go for it. And I hope that you can ask those 3 questions and then go for whatever dreams or goals that you have, and do not let anyone tell you you can't. I mean, as long as you're not hurting people. But just go for it. Just go for your dreams and know that you will be protected by the answer to the 3 questions. I'm not saying bad things won't happen or can't happen. I'm saying, in general, the answer to the 3 questions will provide a shielding from your own doubts and fears and from things that you worry about that do not exist or will not come to fruition. You're going to have a goal in the present moment. You're going to have the kernel that comes up. You're going to say, yeah, I want that. And then later in time, in the timeline, you will be there. You will arrive at the goal. And then you can look back and see all the, links in the chain all the way back to that first kernel, and better understand how your free will and willpower brought you to that point of, happiness or achievement or whatever you want to call it, success, okay? But it'll just be another state of being in the future that you arrive at, because time is a transporter. You can do nothing and it will move you through to future events. Or you can do all the things you want and you will still just move through time to that end point, okay? And I cannot guarantee how you feel when you get there, but you will have at least have arrived. So I hope this has helped someone in some way, because I hate the sound of my own voice. And good luck out there.